Hello multi-munching malt-o-matics. I'm Ralphie in the bothy. Welcome to Ralphie Review 911 and a great big malt mention thanks to Brown Water Boys for providing the malt moment. Yes, let us continue with a whisky review, a single malt whisky. It's what I tend to specialise in and what I focus on here in the bothy. And we're now in a new year, and I'm going to make a prediction that the whisky and quality spirits landscape around the world is going to undergo significant change. Some distilleries' reputations will start to wane and diminish, and other distilleries will very rapidly attract a credible following of malt mates who really appreciate the quality of what's in the bottle at the price. Now, this situation applied to Glen Scotia last year, where the 15, the 18, and in particular the Victoriana got very well deserved praise for the superb quality of the signature from Glen Scotia Distillery in Campbelltown. 2021 was the year that made Glen Scotia. How's it getting on now? A couple of years ago it came under new ownership, and they have, as far as I'm aware, been investing in increasing production down at the distillery because it's going to be good for business. Simple as that. It's Glen Scotia from Campbelltown, and this bottle is 12-year-old, cask strength, seasonal release they call it. Seasonal release. Bottled at 54.7%. It doesn't tell you on anything in the bottle about chill filtration, not being chill filtered. It doesn't tell you anything about caramel not being added, about it being natural colour. I'm not seeing it in the bottle. The bottle is where it matters. Never mind the box. I don't actually have a box for this. See, this is the thing. When a bottle gets separated from the box, and there's plenty of shops where boxes get damaged, and then the shops only sell the bottle. Well, I've only got the bottle. So I can only go on the information the bottle provides me, rather than the container it comes in, because that container is not always there. Simples. It states finished in a combination of heavily charred and Oloroso casks. So what do we have here as a seasonal release from Glen Scotia? On the tail of the fact, and this is the tail end of 2021, where it's won the International Best Single Malt Scotch Whisky Award of the Year with the 25-year-old. And people around the world have had their socks blown off by several bottlings from this distillery, which have been provided at accessible prices, at realistic prices. In other words, when you taste what you're getting out of the bottle, you say to yourself, do you know what? That's worth the price. What do we have here? Toffee-ish. In other words, the charred oak casks are definitely well charred. See, what happens is when you're charring casks, you're going a little bit beyond toasting them. Toasting is light. It's sort of scorching the inside of the cask and releasing a few more spicy, slightly complex notes into the whisky that's maturing in it. But when you char the cask, that's a different situation altogether. You are roasting the wood, and it's like baking it in a very hot oven. The natural sugars in the wood start to caramelise, and therefore you get these toffee notes. And you also come across, as the wood starts to cook and roast, you get these nutty notes getting created. And that's the first thing that I'm getting off the top of this malt, rather than the signature of 12-year-old Glen Scotia. To be honest, initially the signature is relatively ambiguous. sherry in there, well, you're getting some raisin. The sherry is slightly restrained, but probably because the charred casks are dominating the first contact to this whisky. I'm sure it'll be different in the taste. Well, I already know. Most of the maturation has taken place in first fill bourbon casks. And I think what they're seeking to do is say, well, we've got some reasonable casks, but can we improve it a little bit? Because the casks are maybe a little bit underperforming. So they transfer into Oloroso. It kind of combines the influence of sherry casks with bourbon casks, so you get a little bit more complexity. And then the heavy charred casks gives that, what you would call in Scotland, a more of a winter note. It's not overtly sherry, but it's a heavy note. And it's quite a richness without being a fruit crate richness. It's more of a hot wood by the fireside type note. First taste. Sharp, young. It's telling me that the first casks used, the bourbon casks, weren't particularly active in their influence. And what you're getting is a kind of overcoat of charred cask and mild sherry. Well, it's noticeably sherry, but it's not imposing sherry because it's in competition with the charred casks. There's a distinctive barley sugar and pear note on this, which I don't automatically associate with Glen Scotia. I would associate pear notes more with Loch Lomond Distillery, the company who own Loch Lomond Distillery happened to own Glen Scotia Distillery as well. So I'm going to add a little bit of water now, bring the strength down, and see if I can get a little bit more out of it. But initial contact, I'm putting in full 5 milliliters, full 5. I bought this on a hunch. It was curiosity actually, because Glen Scotia have had such a good run in 2021. I was kind of curious to see how they would follow it up. Now, there are 3 available affordable bottlings at the moment from Glen Scotia. There is the double cask at 46%, non-age statement, which is probably, to be honest, the one I would recommend to you. It is half the price of this, and this is certainly not double the value of whisky compared to the double cask, the non-age statement. There's an 11-year-old sherry double cask finish, and I think that, along with this bottling, is a sign that they're trying to dress up some of the stock in the Glen Scotia warehouses, which hasn't been as entirely successful as the first release batches have been, and they're doing the best they can with the resources they've got. But the reason I mention that is because of the price. This is selling in the UK at £75 a bottle. And I'm telling you right now, you're going to get a lot of other far better whiskies than this for that price. For what it is, it's too expensive. Yeah. Now, if it's £75 in the UK, you can bet your bottom euro or dollar that wherever you are in the world, it's going to be even dearer. So proceed with caution here. Distilleries can't turn themselves around overnight. Last year we saw two distilleries start to shine because they already had the stock in the warehouses. One was Glen Scotia, the other was Glenturret. Both doing magnificently well. I have high hopes and great expectations for Glen Scotia. But the producers need to be patient and build up quality stock. And as drinkers, we need to be aware that the honeymoon really is kind of over for the moment. When we see Victoriana again, it will not be the same, in my opinion. It just won't, as the first time round. It's usually, in the old days, a very expensive, time-consuming exercise to turn round the reputation of a distillery. a modest distillery, a small, medium-sized distillery. Glen Scotia is a small distillery, but its reputation was turned around in months, literally months, at very, very minimal cost to the producers, for a simple reason: the internet, the Maltmates, the Whisky Anoraks, the online community. That's what's done it for Glen Scotia, that's what's doing it for Glenturret. Distillers now have a much narrower response time than they used to when it comes to following up their best version releases with the second best version releases. And it's a very pleasant, very decent, very competent single malt. But particularly at the price, I think I'll be waiting a while before I buy another Glen Scotia. I am spoiled for choice, Maltmates. So are you. Use the options you have. Really shop around. Explore. Malt, one more taste, now hang about. Another taste of this, because I've now added water and given it a few minutes to sit. The 11-year-old double cask sherry matured version is kind of similar to this, but not as nutty and as what I would call singularly flavoursome. But this is, I would call this a very contemporary single malt. Do you know what I mean by that? Contemporary. Nose is improving big time. Now we're getting a little bit more distillery signature. But we're also getting that pear note, which, to be honest, to me comes more from the casks than it comes from the single malt. The sherry casks are competent, they're not outstanding, far from it. The charring of the casks is pretty rustic. What do I mean by that? I better explain myself. Industrial. Get the burner in, really blast it, keep blasting it. Has it got that alligator char look that you'd have for a cask maturing bourbon in the US? Right, that'll do fine. Get it out there, into the yard. There's some dark fruits, plum, without doubt. The heat initially has subsided with adding water. It's a more complex experience, but it's also a relatively young experience. It's all up front and then the beginning of the development. So you've got a big arrival, big development, then it just systematically fades away with a few tangy sort of scorched wood notes into something mildly gingery, and there you have it. Malt mark. I will give this perfectly, no, it's not worth that. Perfectly reasonable and competent, 82 out of 100. Maltmates, that's a malt mark. Now, if you return again shortly for Ralphie Review 911 Extras, I am going to host a little beginner's class in infinity bottles. And the reason for this is simple. I've had a number of requests for that. So Maltmates, hope you've enjoyed this review. Click subscribe, click likey, follow me on Patreon. Please subscribe there and I'll see you soon.